If you follow me on Instagram, it will come as no surprise that I've been known to enjoy a glass of wine. In fact, 5 years ago, I started posting on Friday evenings with a social post called #FridayNightWineClub. What you might not know is Friday Night Wine Club was actually an idea that was sparked by a story I had rolling around inside my head. The thing is, that story idea stayed with me for another 4 years before Growing into Greatness was released. Want to know the full story? Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Tanya E. Williams, author of historical women's fiction, including the Vintage Vineyard standalone book series, and today I'm sharing how the idea for this series came to be. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit subscribe, and you'll be notified each week when I release new videos covering topics that shape a story idea into a novel readers will enjoy. First, you may be wondering what a standalone book series is. In the case of the Vintage Vineyard series, each novel stands on its own, meaning that every story has its own characters, its own location, and its own story trajectory. So each book can be read by itself without a reader having to read the books in any particular order. This is great news for readers who don't lean into the book series reading pattern. And I must admit, I am one of those readers who prefer standalone stories. I do read a few select series, but almost all of them can be read on their own without reading book one first. What does connect a standalone book series together is a theme, a location, or in the case of the Vintage Vineyard series, the inclusion of a vineyard within the story's pages. Though you will get a completely different story with new characters, time periods, and more in each Vintage Vineyard novel, you will find that the backdrop of a vineyard will play a crucial role in some aspect of each novel. As an author, I also prefer to write standalone novels. Writing a series is an extra challenge within the challenge that already exists when it comes to writing a novel. With so many details to remember in a series about a large cast of characters with each book written, I am forever grateful for my virtual assistant who takes my Hotel Hamilton novels and produces a book Bible for me, with chapter-by-chapter highlights and character details I may forget while I write. 5 years ago, I knew I wanted to write a standalone series that would allow me to stretch my wings as a writer by crafting new stories for each novel within the series. I tossed a few ideas around, wrote some preliminary thoughts down, but after months of contemplation, I wasn't convinced I had found my point of connection yet. That's when I went back to basics, which for me means location. I enjoy an immersive setting in a novel, a location so vivid it becomes one of the characters. The Hotel Hamilton novels take place in Vancouver, yes, but it is the hotel that intrigues me most. For all that was, it was the Seattle church that captured my attention with the question of what would these walls say if they could speak? I've always loved the landscape of a vineyard. The rolling hills lined with straight rows of vines is as appealing to the eye as it is to my innate desire of seeing things exist in an orderly fashion. To this day, I would love to live on a vineyard. I don't want to own one. I just want to live there and walk among the vines and maybe partake in the wine tasting too. When the idea of a standalone series being set on a vineyard came to me, it felt so right that I wondered if the idea hadn't always been there from the beginning. I knew I was onto something as the buzzing of anticipation vibrated through me, but I also knew I had a lot to learn. I've enjoyed wine for a very long time. In fact, there's a photo of me 30+ years ago in my wedding dress with a glass of wine to my lips. I can't say that my taste in wine back then was stellar, and I have been teased incessantly about my previous inclination to sip wine that surely consisted of nothing more than fruit juice and sugar rather than actual wine itself. Clearly, I had a steep learning curve ahead of me, but I found myself so excited by the idea that I was not only willing to do the work, I would actually spend the next 4 years researching the topic before it would become a novel. I started with the basics. Having only drank white wine up till that point in my life, I knew I had to expand my horizons. I dove into the books, reading novels featuring vineyards, researching the history of wine, and tasting wines outside of my comfort zone as I dipped my toe into the very big world of wine. When Sophia's story began to formulate in my mind's eye, I was met with a young woman on a mission. I knew immediately she was tenacious, hardworking, and stubborn as a mule. Her role as a protagonist was an easy match given the roles women were permitted to partake in during that time in history. What struck me first, though, was the thought of a man's life and how it might crumble under pressures outside of his control. The words from a Dickens novel, A Tale of Two Cities, kept running through my mind. You know the line, "It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness." The opening paragraph goes on, but what if a man was welcoming in a new generation while at the same time he was losing his way of providing for them? That was it. I saw it clearly, the arrival of not one, but two children. Twins arriving into a family just as the laws of Prohibition were enacted for a winemaker in the Napa Valley. That was the spark that kicked off the story. The spark quickly grew into a blazing fire as I asked myself what actually happened to vineyards when Prohibition became law in 1920. The answer to that particular question was some of the greatest research I have ever had the privilege of completing. With the help of several Napa Valley resources, I was directed to 3 vineyards that remained active during Prohibition. The one that really caught my eye indicated it had opened its doors in 1922. Why, I asked, would a vineyard open during a ban on wine sales? For me, the plot thickened. I plugged away on the story, jotting notes down here and there, while continuing to research the region of the Napa Valley. My characters were growing by leaps and bounds in my imagination, and the complex family dynamics were rearing their heads at every turn in my fictional world. Then, on my second research trip to Napa, I had more questions answered than I had ever thought to ask, and I found myself down an even bigger rabbit hole, and loving every minute of it. It was during this trip that I tasted Pinot Noir, Cab Sauv, Merlot, and more for the first time. I fell in love, and it wasn't just with the wine. I was head over heels for the Napa Valley, its people, their love of wine, and the history that exists among the vines. From family stories to Prohibition tales to the cycle of a vineyard, all of it was scribbled in my notebook with a furious hand. These insights learned added so much depth and color to the story, and I am grateful to each and every vineyard and family that welcomed us into their homes, offices, vineyards, and tasting rooms. When it came time to write the story, the idea for a complex story structure sidelined me for a few weeks. Could I really pull it off? I honestly didn't know if it would work. With 4 years of research and literal piles of notes stacking up beside me, I decided to give it a try. I set out to weave a story beginning in the present day of 1960 while going backward in time to 1930 as 10-year-old Sophia Russo takes her first sip of Russo wine. From there, the story dips in and out of the past, eventually culminating back in the present day. Add to that, my wine and vineyard research was far from over. At each turn of writing the novel, I found myself needing more details. How is a canopy pruned, and why is it pruned heavily or not? I learned that each type of grape requires its own set of instructions when it comes to canopy management. When I ventured beyond the harvest in the story, I had to learn how one actually makes wine, not just in the general sense of the process, but the actual steps in terms of timeline and attention. Then there is the math. Have you ever heard of wine math? Let me tell you, it's not for the timid. I watched countless videos on wine math just so I could make sure my fictional Russo vineyard was producing the correct amount of wine. The thing about writing novels is, in order to give readers an immersive reading experience, the author needs to know far more about their story's topic, so they can dole out the right amount of information to provide context for the story while not overwhelming the reader with an info dump. This isn't only the case for historical fiction. This is true for most authors who base their stories in reality. Sometimes what you need to know as an author surprises you. At one point during writing the story, I realized I had given the Russo family Zinfandel grapes in their vineyard. The varietal was quite popular for the era and was also a key element when it came to the economics of vineyard life at the time. One day I was writing into the evening when my head popped up from my computer and I said, "I've never tasted red Zinfandel wine." Without hesitating, my husband headed off to the store to procure a bottle of red Zinfandel for me to taste, so I could write about it with accuracy. These are the kinds of things that came up while writing Growing into Greatness. I didn't anticipate needing 4 years of research to write Growing into Greatness, and I certainly didn't think my Friday Night Wine Club posts were premature at the time, since I originally thought they'd be a great lead-up to the release of the first Vintage Vineyard novel. Even though the path was not at all linear, or tidy, or quick, the journey of learning about vineyards, wine, and their history was absolutely worth the price of admission. The great thing about knowledge is that you can build on it. I am happy to report the second novel in the Vintage Vineyard series did not take me another 4 years to complete, and the Bootlegger's Betrayal releases on May 13th, 2025. Be sure to follow me on Instagram for the latest news and let me know in the comments if you enjoy pairing your latest read with a glass of wine. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe so YouTube knows this content was enjoyable. Thanks for watching and happy reading.